The sirens blared as the fire truck raced down the street, its flashing lights illuminating the night. But as the firefighters rushed to extinguish the flames, they were stunned to find the homeowner, Karen, stubbornly blocking their path. Her own kitchen was engulfed in fire, yet she refused to let them through. What twisted logic drove this woman to jeopardize her own safety? And why was she so desperate to keep the firefighters at bay? Karen's hands trembled as she watched the smoke billowing from her kitchen window. She had been so distracted, so caught up in her petty feud with the neighbors, that she had left the stove unattended. Now, her home was in grave danger, the flames licking hungrily at the wooden cabinets. Panic surged through her as the sound of a fire truck siren pierced the air. Within minutes, the large red vehicle screeched to a halt in front of her house. Karen's eyes narrowed with determination. There was no way she was going to let those firefighters set foot on her property, not after what the Wilsons had done. Rushing outside, she planted herself firmly in the driveway, arms crossed defiantly. "Stay back!" she shouted as the firefighters piled out of the truck, their faces etched with confusion. "Ma'am, your house is on fire?" the captain said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to extinguish the flames immediately." Karen shook her head vehemently. "I don't care. You're not coming in. This is my property, and I won't have you interfering." The captain exchanged a baffled glance with his crew. "Ma'am, we're here to help. Please move aside so we can do our job." "No." Karen's voice rose to a shrill shriek. "The Wilsons put you up to this, didn't they? Well, I'm not falling for their tricks. I know what they're trying to do, and I won't let you be a part of it." The firefighters stood dumbfounded, unsure of how to proceed. The flames were growing stronger, licking at the window frames, but Karen refused to budge. Her eyes were wild, her expression one of pure, unadulterated rage. "Ma'am, your house is in danger. We need to act now before it's too late," the captain pleaded, taking a step forward. Karen's hand shot out, blocking his path. "I said no. If you take one more step, I'll—" Her words were cut off by a deafening crash as the kitchen window shattered, sending a shower of glass and smoke billowing into the night air. The firefighters tensed, their instincts screaming at them to intervene. But Karen's unwavering stance kept them rooted to the spot, their hands gripping their equipment, torn between their duty and the bizarre obstinance of the homeowner. As the fire continued to rage, Karen's mouth twisted into a grim smile. She had made her point, and she knew the Wilsons would pay dearly for their meddling. But at what cost? The flickering flames cast an ominous glow over her face, hinting at the dark and desperate depths of her determination. The firefighters stood frozen, their eyes locked on the growing inferno that consumed Karen's kitchen. The heat was intense, the crackle of the flames almost deafening, yet the woman remained steadfast in her obstruction. "Ma'am, please," the captain pleaded once more, his voice tinged with desperation. "We need to put out this fire before it spreads. Lives are at stake." Karen's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Lives? You mean the Wilsons? Well, they can burn for all I care." She leaned in, her eyes narrowing to slits. "This is my fight, and I'll be damned if I let you interfere." The captain's brow furrowed in confusion and concern. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow your personal grievances to put an entire neighborhood at risk. We have a duty to protect property and save lives." Karen's expression hardened, her jaw set with unwavering determination. "Then you'll have to go through me first." The firefighters exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to proceed. They couldn't simply force their way past the obstinate homeowner, not without risking a physical confrontation. And the fire showed no signs of relenting, the flames now licking at the roof's edge. Suddenly, a voice called out from the growing crowd of onlookers. "That's her, officer. That's the woman who's been causing trouble for weeks." Karen whirled around to see her neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, gesturing frantically toward the police car that had just pulled up. Her face was a mask of triumph, her eyes gleaming with vindication. What is the meaning of this? The police officer demanded, striding toward Karen. This woman is preventing us from putting out a fire in her own home, the captain explained, his frustration evident. The officer's gaze hardened as he fixed Karen with a stern look. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move aside and let the firefighters do their job. Obstructing emergency services is a serious offense. Karen's eyes darted between the officer, the firefighters, and the Wilsons, who were now watching with barely concealed glee. Her chest heaved with panicked breaths, and for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. But then, her expression hardened once more, and she planted her feet, refusing to budge. No, she growled. This is my fight, and I won't let anyone interfere. Not the Wilsons, not the firefighters, and certainly not you. The officer's jaw tightened, and he reached for his handcuffs. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction of emergency services. You're coming with me. As the officer moved to apprehend Karen, the crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps and murmurs. The firefighters surged forward, finally able to rush into the burning building, their hoses at the ready. But Karen's defiant screams pierced the air, her cries of outrage and betrayal echoing through the chaos. The world seemed to slow down as she was led away, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and resignation. She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, all for the sake of her vendetta against the Wilsons. And now, as she watched her home burn, she realized that her obsession had consumed her, blinding her to the very danger she had sought to protect. As the police officer led Karen away in handcuffs, the chaos on the street only intensified. The firefighters, now unimpeded, rushed into the burning house, their hoses spraying water in a desperate attempt to quell the flames. The crowd watched in a mixture of shock and morbid fascination, murmurs and gasps rippling through the onlookers as the drama unfolded. Mrs. Wilson, Karen's neighbor, stood with a triumphant smirk, her arms crossed as she watched the woman she had long despised being dragged away. I told you she was trouble, Mrs. Wilson said smugly to the police officer. Always causing problems, that one. If only she had just let the firefighters do their job, this whole mess could have been avoided. The officer glanced over at the raging fire, then back at Karen, who was being shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. Ma'am, I understand you've had issues with your neighbor, but her actions just now put lives at risk. That's not something we can ignore, no matter the history between you two. Mrs. Wilson's smile widened. Oh, I know. And believe me, I'm glad she's finally getting what she deserves. That woman has been a thorn in my side for years, and I won't shed a single tear to see her behind bars. The officer frowned, sensing an undercurrent of deeper animosity between the two women. Well, I'm sure the court will have a lot of questions for her. In the meantime, we need to focus on containing this fire and ensuring the safety of the surrounding homes. As the officer moved to assist the firefighters, Mrs. Wilson's gaze remained fixed on the burning house, her expression a strange mix of satisfaction and apprehension. Deep down, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Karen had always been unpredictable, driven by a fierce determination that bordered on the irrational. And now, with her home and freedom in jeopardy, there was no telling what she might do. Inside the patrol car, Karen sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. How had it all come to this? She had been so certain, so convinced that she was right, that the Wilsons were to blame for her predicament. But now, as she watched the flames consume her kitchen, a sinking feeling of dread and regret began to take hold. Karen had always been a fiercely independent woman, unwilling to back down from a challenge or concede defeat. But in her single-minded pursuit of vengeance, she had lost sight of what truly mattered: her own safety, her own home. And now, as the reality of her actions dawned on her, she felt a wave of shame and despair wash over her. The officer slid into the driver's seat, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. We've got a lot of questions for you. Karen nodded mutely, her gaze fixed on the smoldering wreckage of her house. As the patrol car pulled away, she couldn't help but wonder if she had irreparably destroyed the very thing she had been fighting to protect. The ride to the police station was tense and uncomfortable, the silence punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the radio. Karen stared straight ahead, her mind a swirling maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Regret, shame, and a twinge of fear battled for dominance as she replayed the events of the night over and over in her mind. As the patrol car pulled into the station, Karen's heart raced. She had never been in trouble with the law before, and the thought of being interrogated by the police filled her with a deep, unsettling dread. The officer opened the door and gestured for her to step out, his expression stoic and unreadable. Karen shuffled into the station, her wrists still bound by the cold metal of the handcuffs. The officer led her to a small, dimly lit room, where he motioned for her to take a seat at the table. Karen complied, her eyes darting around the Spartan space, taking in every detail. The officer took a seat across from her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "All right, ma'am. Let's start with the basics. What's your name?" "Karen," she responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Karen what?" "Karen Steen." The officer nodded, jotting the information down in his notepad. "And can you tell me what happened tonight, Karen? Why did you refuse to let the firefighters into your home?" Karen's eyes darted away, her fingers fidgeting nervously. It's complicated," she mumbled, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The officer leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I'm listening. Help me understand what was going through your mind." Karen took a deep, shuddering breath. "It was the Wilsons. They've been tormenting me for years, ever since we moved in next door. Petty little things, like stealing my mail or letting their dog bark all night. But then, a few weeks ago, they took it too far." She paused, her expression hardening. "They filed a complaint with the city, claiming my fence was encroaching on their property. I spent thousands of dollars fighting it, and in the end, I had to take the damn thing down. That's when I knew they were trying to ruin me." The officer nodded, his pen moving across the page. "So you believe the Wilsons were behind the fire, and you were trying to keep the firefighters from helping them?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. I knew they were up to something, trying to get back at me. I couldn't let them win, not after everything I've been through." "But ma'am, your own home was on fire. Didn't you realize you were putting yourself in danger?" Karen's gaze faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. I don't know. I just knew I couldn't let them win. It was the only thing that mattered." The officer shook his head, a sigh escaping his lips. "Karen, you do realize that by obstructing emergency services, you've committed a serious crime, right? We're talking fines, possible jail time. And all for what? A petty feud with your neighbors?" Karen's eyes widened, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to get back at them, to show them they couldn't push me around. But I never thought." Her voice trailed off, the realization of her own foolishness crashing down upon her. The officer reached across the table, his expression softening. "Look, I can see you're a proud woman, and you felt you had to stand up for yourself. But sometimes, our emotions can cloud our judgment, and we end up making decisions that only make things worse. Now you've got a lot to answer for, and the consequences are going to be severe. But if you're willing to cooperate, maybe we can find a way to mitigate the damage." Karen's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. She had let her obsession with the Wilsons blind her to the reality of the situation. And now she was facing the very real possibility of losing everything: her home, her freedom, and perhaps even her sense of self. As the gravity of her predicament settled in, she couldn't help but wonder if her quest for vengeance had truly been worth the price. As the interrogation continued, Karen's resolve began to crumble. The weight of her actions, the potential consequences, and the realization of how far she had let her feud with the Wilsons spiral out of control, all combined to erode her stubborn defiance. I wanted to get back at them, she stammered, her voice laced with desperation. They've been making my life miserable for years, and I couldn't take it anymore. When I saw the fire, I thought it was their doing, that they were trying to frame me or something. I couldn't let them win, not after everything I'd been through. The officer listened intently, his expression a mix of understanding and disapproval. I get that you felt wronged, Karen, but putting your own home and life at risk, that's a whole other level. And obstructing the fire department, that's a serious crime. Karen's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. I know. I wasn't thinking straight. All I could see was red, and I just reacted. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The officer let out a heavy sigh. Well, unfortunately, that's not going to matter much in the eyes of the law. You've got a lot of explaining to do, and the consequences could be severe. Karen's eyes widened with fear. Prison. Am I going to jail? The officer held up a hand. I can't say for certain, but obstructing emergency services is a criminal offense. You'll likely face fines and possibly jail time, depending on how the courts view your actions and the damage done. Karen felt her heart sink. The prospect of losing her freedom, of being torn away from her home and her life, was a terrifying prospect. She had always prided herself on her independence, her unwavering determination, but now all of that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice trembling. I just wanted to get back at the Wilsons, to show them they couldn't push me around. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The officer leaned forward, his expression softening. Look, I can see you're genuinely remorseful, and that counts for something. But the fact is, you put a lot of people in danger tonight, including yourself. The courts are going to have to decide how to handle that. Karen nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I understand. I just hope they'll be lenient, that they'll see that I never meant for it to go this far. The officer reached across the table, placing a hand on Karen's arm. I can't make any promises, but I'll do what I can to advocate for you. Just be honest, take responsibility for your actions, and maybe the judge will see that you're not a hardened criminal, just someone who let their emotions get the better of them. Karen nodded, her lips quivering. Thank you, she whispered, the weight of her predicament finally sinking in. She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, all in the name of vendetta that had now consumed her. And as she sat there, facing the very real possibility of losing everything, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. As the night wore on, Karen sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. The harsh fluorescent lights and the ever-present hum of the station's machinery only served to heighten her sense of unease, the weight of her actions pressing down on her with each passing minute. The officer had left her alone for now, promising to return with more questions and, ultimately, the decision that would determine her fate. Karen's fingers trembled as she replayed the events of the evening in her mind, the images of her burning home, and the defiant stand she had taken against the firefighters searing into her consciousness. She had been so convinced of her righteousness, so certain that the Wilsons were behind the fire and that she was the only one who could stop them. But now, in the cold, harsh light of reality, Karen was forced to confront the truth. Her obsession had blinded her, leading her down a path of self-destruction that had put not only her own life, but those of her neighbors in jeopardy. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she contemplated the gravity of her situation. The officer had been clear. She was facing serious legal consequences, potentially including hefty fines and even the possibility of jail time. The thought of losing her freedom, of being torn away from the life she had built, sent a shiver of dread down her spine. But even more troubling was the nagging realization that she had lost something far more precious, her sense of self, her very identity. The Karen Steen she had once known, the fiercely independent woman who refused to back down from a challenge, had been consumed by a dark, all-consuming obsession. And now, as she sat in this cold, sterile room, she couldn't help but wonder if that version of herself was truly gone forever. The sound of the door creaking open jolted Karen from her thoughts, and she looked up to see the officer re-entering the room, a somber expression on his face. "Karen," he began, his voice tinged with a hint of sympathy. "I've been going over the details of your case, and I'm afraid I have some bad news." Karen's heart raced as she waited with bated breath, the officer's words echoing in her mind like a death knell. She braced herself for the worst, knowing that whatever was about to come, she had no one to blame but herself. "The damage to your home was extensive," the officer continued, his gaze unwavering. "The fire department was able to contain the blaze, but not before it had completely destroyed your kitchen and caused significant damage to the rest of the house. I'm sorry, Karen, but it's been deemed a total loss." Karen felt the air leave her lungs, the weight of the officer's words crashing down upon her like a ton of bricks. Her home, the one place she had always taken pride in, the sanctuary she had cherished for so many years, was gone, reduced to ashes by the very flames she had tried so desperately to keep at bay. "And that's not all," the officer pressed on, his expression grave. "Given the severity of the situation and your actions in obstructing the fire department, the district attorney has decided to pursue criminal charges against you. You're facing fines, possible jail time, and a lengthy legal battle to determine the outcome." Karen's vision blurred as tears sprang to her eyes, her world crumbling around her. She had lost everything: her home, her freedom, and perhaps even her very identity. And all for the sake of a vendetta that had consumed her, blinding her to the very real consequences of her actions. As the officer continued to outline the details of her predicament, Karen sat in stunned silence, the weight of her choices finally sinking in. She had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, all in the pursuit of a twisted sense of justice. And now, as she faced the harsh reality of her situation, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. As the officer laid out the grim details of her predicament, Karen felt as if the very air had been sucked from the room. Her home, her refuge, the one place she had always taken solace in, reduced to a smoldering ruin by the very flames she had tried so desperately to keep at bay. And now, on top of that devastating loss, she was facing the prospect of hefty fines and potentially even jail time for her reckless actions in obstructing the firefighters. The weight of her choices, the realization of how far she had allowed her obsession to consume her, threatened to crush her very spirit. I don't understand," Karen stammered, her voice trembling. "How could this have happened? I was just trying to protect myself, to keep the Wilsons from getting the upper hand." The officer regarded her with a mixture of empathy and reproach. "I know you felt wronged, Karen, and that you were trying to stand up for yourself. But by obstructing the fire department, you put a lot of lives at risk, including your own. The law can't simply ignore that, no matter the circumstances." Karen's hands clenched into fists, her eyes burning with a desperate fury. "But it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to show them, to make them pay for what they'd done. How could everything have gone so wrong?" The officer let out a weary sigh. "Sometimes, our emotions can cloud our judgment, leading us down a path we never intended to take. And the consequences of those actions can be severe, no matter how justified we may feel." Karen's shoulders slumped, the fight slowly draining from her. "So, what happens now? What's going to happen to me?" "Well, that's going to be up to the courts to decide," the officer replied. "The district attorney is pursuing criminal charges against you, and you'll need to appear before a judge to answer for your actions. Depending on the severity of the charges and the circumstances of the case, you could be facing fines, probation, or even jail time." Karen felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of jail. The thought of being torn away from her life, of losing her freedom, was a terrifying prospect, one that she had never once considered, even in her most desperate moments. "I can't go to jail," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose everything I've worked for, everything I've built. There has to be something I can do, some way to make this right." The officer regarded her with a somber expression. "I wish I could give you better news, Karen, but the truth is, you're in a very difficult position. The best thing you can do now is to cooperate fully with the authorities, take responsibility for your actions, and hope that the judge will show some leniency. But I won't lie to you, the road ahead is going to be a long and challenging one." Karen nodded, her mind racing as she tried to process the gravity of her situation. She had come to this station with the belief that she was the victim, that she was fighting for justice against the Wilsons. But now, as she sat across from the officer, she realized that she had become the villain in her own story. A cautionary tale of how far one's obsession can spiral out of control. With a heavy heart, Karen resigned herself to the fact that her quest for vengeance had come at a devastating cost. And as she contemplated the uncertain future that lay before her, she couldn't help but wonder if any of it had truly been worth it. As the days turned into weeks, Karen found herself trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. The weight of her actions had taken a devastating toll, not only on her home and her finances, but on her very sense of self. The district attorney had indeed pursued criminal charges against her, and Karen found herself standing before a stern-faced judge, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resignation. She had spent countless hours with her attorney, meticulously going over the details of the case, but deep down, she knew that her fate was largely out of her hands. In the end, the judge's ruling was a bittersweet one. Karen was found guilty of obstructing emergency services, a conviction that would mar her record and carry serious financial consequences. However, the judge, recognizing the complex circumstances that had led to her actions, opted for a more lenient sentence, probation and a hefty fine rather than the dreaded jail time. As Karen walked out of the courtroom, a sense of relief mingled with a profound sadness. She had lost so much: her home, her sense of security, and perhaps even a part of her own identity. The once fiercely independent Karen Steen had been humbled, her obsession with the Wilsons having consumed her in ways she could never have imagined. Yet, in the wake of her downfall, Karen found herself facing a new reality, one filled with both challenges and unexpected opportunities. With the help of her attorney and a newfound determination to rebuild her life, she began the arduous process of finding a new home and piecing together the shattered fragments of her existence. The Wilsons, once the target of her relentless vendetta, now found themselves grappling with a strange sense of unease. They had, after all, been the catalyst for Karen's downfall, a fact that weighed heavily on their conscience. In a surprising twist, the Wilsons reached out to Karen, offering a sincere apology and even a small financial contribution toward her recovery. For Karen, this unexpected gesture was a bittersweet revelation, a reminder that the lines between victim and perpetrator had become blurred, and that even her most hated adversaries were capable of empathy and remorse. It was a humbling realization, one that forced her to confront the harsh truth that her single-minded pursuit of justice had ultimately been her own undoing. As she settled into her new, modest apartment, Karen found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned, the scars she had endured, and the person she had become. The Karen Steen of old was gone, replaced by a more introspective, cautious individual, one who had learned the hard way that unchecked obsession could lead to devastating consequences. But in the midst of her trials, Karen also found glimmers of hope. She had discovered a newfound appreciation for the simple things in life, the small moments of joy that had once been overshadowed by her relentless quest for vengeance. And as she looked toward the future, she couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism, a determination to rebuild her life, to learn from her mistakes, and to find a way to move forward one step at a time. The road ahead would not be an easy one, but for the first time in a long while, Karen felt a spark of resilience within her, a glimmer of the independent spirit that had once defined her. And as she embraced this new chapter, She couldn't help but wonder what the future held, and whether the Wilsons, once her greatest adversaries, might one day become unexpected allies in her journey of redemption.